I want you to just take a second and imagine a cathedral.
Oh, that's a good visual.
Right. Like really picture in your mind's eye. You've got the towering arches, the flying buttresses, those vaulted ceilings just reaching all the way up into the sky.
Huge, heavy stone structures.
Exactly. But I actually don't want you to picture one made of heavy stone or, thick oak timbers or even stained glass. I want you to imagine that exact same towering, really intricate structure, but built entirely of thread and air.
Which is hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is a structure that only manages to hold itself together, to literally remain standing because of what is explicitly not there.
Yeah, it's a stunning visual. And honestly, it is a completely counterintuitive way to think about how things are built.
Right.
Because when we think of architecture or engineering or even just, basic survival, we usually think of strength as something solid. We think of impenetrable walls, heavy foundations.
We think of mass, like bulk. But today, we are going completely in the opposite direction. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We have been poring over this incredibly comprehensive collection of research. It's an extensive stack of source material. We're calling it the lace.pdf documents.
And it covers everything. I mean, historical archives, material science breakdowns,
economic analyses, and even some really deep psychological frameworks. And it is all centered around one specific, seemingly delicate textile: lace.
just lace.
Just lace. And our mission today is to explore how a fabric that is literally defined by absence, by, empty space, somehow became a permanent record of human class, of grueling labor, and of extreme cultural tension.
It's wild how much history is woven into it. Pun absolutely intended.
Oh, definitely. So whether you are a fashion historian or maybe someone fascinated by the invisible strings of global trade, or, I don't know, you're just looking to understand the hidden architecture of the everyday objects around you, stick with us.
Because this is going to completely change how you look at something you've probably just, ignored your entire life.
Exactly. I mean, I never thought twice about it before reading this material. Same. But before we can really grasp how this specific fabric managed to shape global empires and rewrite trade laws, which it did, we have to start at the absolute foundation.
The structural basics.
Right. We have to understand what lace actually is, structurally speaking, because our modern brains tend to miscategorize it entirely.
That is so true. Because if I just ask you, the listener, right now, to think of lace, you probably picture a solid piece of cloth that someone has just punched a bunch of decorative holes into.
Like a stencil.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you were a kid making a paper snowflake. You take a solid piece of paper, you cut pieces out of it, and you unfold it.
But the research is very, very clear on this. That is absolutely not lace.
No. True lace is an open-work textile. It is not fabric with holes in it. The holes are structural. They're the actual point of the fabric.
And that distinction between solid fabric and open work, it's crucial. It helps to just visualize the mechanics of normal cloth first. So if you look closely at, say, the shirt you are wearing right now, or a pair of jeans, you are basically looking at a grid.
With woven cloth, you have warp threads and weft threads.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because those are pretty technical terms. Break down warp and weft for me. Let's pretend I've, never seen a loom in my life.
Fair enough. Imagine you're setting up a basic hand loom. You stretch a series of really strong threads vertically, from the top of the loom straight to the bottom.
Pulling them tight.
Very tight. Those vertical stationary threads, that's the warp. They are the foundation of the grid. Then you take another thread, which is called the weft, and you weave it horizontally.
Over and under.
Right. Over one vertical thread, under the next, over, under, back and forth across the whole width. You're essentially building this microscopic checkerboard. You are creating a solid, continuous surface.
Okay, so normal fabric is just a massive grid of intersections. It's solid.
Correct. But lace does not start with a surface. It doesn't use a warp and a weft at all. It starts with nothing.
Which is mind-blowing.
It really is. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's textile department, they actually identified two classic historical handmade families of lace that illustrate how you build something out of literally nothing.
And the first branch of that family tree is needle lace, which sounds almost impossible when you read the step-by-step breakdown of how it's actually created.
It's painstaking.
I was trying to wrap my head around it, and it sounds less like sewing and more like microscopic bricklaying.
That's a really good way to describe it. Needle lace is built using just a single needle and one continuous piece of thread.
Like thread.
Just one. It relies on thousands upon thousands of tiny looped stitches, specifically a variation of what's called the buttonhole stitch.
Okay, walk me through the actual physical process here. How does a person sitting in a chair turn one thread into like a complex floral pattern just floating in the air?
So the maker starts with a piece of thick parchment paper, or sometimes vellum. They draw the exact design they want. Say it's a complex geometric star, or maybe a rose. They draw it directly onto the parchment. Then they take a thicker, heavier foundation thread, and they baste it, which means they temporarily tack it down along the outlines of that drawing.
So they're basically tracing the drawing with a thick string.
Exactly. And this foundation thread is called the coordinate. But here is where the magic happens. Once that outline is tacked down, the maker uses their single needle and really fine thread to build the fabric entirely in the air between those thick boundary lines.
In the air, just spanning the gaps.
Yeah, they use these tiny, tightly packed looping stitches. They anchor the fine thread to the foundation string, loop it over itself to create a tiny knot, and then loop it again. They're just building row upon row of microscopic bridges.
Wow.
And they fill in the empty spaces with varying densities of stitches. So like tighter stitches for shading, looser ones for texture.
And then what? Because it's still stuck to the paper, right?
Yeah. Right. When the entire pattern is filled in, they turn it over and carefully cut the temporary basting stitches from the back of the parchment. The parchment just falls away, and you are left with this freestanding, highly sculptural three-dimensional fabric.
That is just incredible. They are literally building a bridge out of microscopic knots.
And that's just one method. On the other side of the lace family tree, you have bobbin lace.
Right. And if needle lace is like building a sculpture out of tiny bricks, the documentation describes bobbin lace more like weaving a complex spider web in midair.
A very apt visual, honestly. Bobbin lace requires a completely different set of tools and physical movements. Instead of a single needle, the maker uses this firm cushion, often called a lace pillow.
Okay.
They prick their pattern into a piece of parchment again, but this time they pin it flat to the cushion. Then they take dozens, and in some really elaborate cases, hundreds of individual threads.
Hundreds of threads at once.
Yeah, and each thread is wound around its own small wooden or bone spool, which is what we call a bobbin.
And these bobbins, they basically act as little handles, right? Because human fingers are just too thick to manipulate hundreds of microscopic threads at the same time.
Exactly. The bobbins add a slight weight too, which keeps the threads perfectly tensioned. And they allow the maker to manipulate the threads rapidly.
So how are they making the pattern?
The lace maker takes these bobbins and begins to twist, cross, and braid the threads around each other, pinning the intersections down into the pillow with straight pins as they go.
So they aren't knotting it like the needle lace.
No, they are not looping knots. They are twisting and plaiting multiple threads to create intricate geometric meshes and solid shapes. And as the work progresses, the finished lace just sort of flows downward over the pillow.
It is a masterpiece of distributed tension.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, let's really think about this, because reading through all these mechanical descriptions, a realization suddenly hit me. Lace isn't actually a material category at all, is it?
Not really, no.
It's an architecture. It is exactly like a suspension bridge. Like, when you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, the marvel isn't the steel itself. The marvel is the tension.
Right, the engineering.
Yes, it's the mathematics of how that tension is distributed across the empty space to hold the entire massive structure up in the air. If you sever one major cable, the tension shifts, and the whole thing could just collapse.
And lace is doing the exact same structural engineering, just on a microscopic, wearable level.
It's just wild.
What's fascinating here is that because of that structural engineering, lace acts as what historians and material scientists call a threshold technology.
Threshold technology. What does that mean in this context?
Well, think about the history of clothing. For centuries, human beings used embroidery to decorate their garments. But embroidery is a surface embellishment.
Right, it sits on top.
Exactly. You take a solid piece of woven fabric, a velvet cloak or a linen tunic, and you sew colored threads on top of it. The base fabric is doing all the work. It carries all the structural weight.
The embroidery is just sitting there looking pretty.
Yes. It's essentially paint on a canvas. Lace represents the exact historical moment where the canvas was removed entirely.
Oh, wow.
It is the moment where the decoration stopped sitting on top of the fabric, and the decoration actually became the fabric itself.
The empty spaces became just as structurally important as the threads.
Precisely. It is a structure of controlled vulnerability.
Controlled vulnerability. I love that phrase so much. And it really makes you think deeply about the actual physical fibers they had to use to achieve that level of tension. Going back to the bridge analogy, you can't just use any old cheap string to build a suspension bridge.
No, it will snap immediately.
Right. So what were they using?
The raw materials dictated the architecture entirely. Historically, the foundation of lace was built on plant-based fibers, specifically linen, which is derived from the flax plant.
Why flax, though? Like, why not cotton or wool?
It comes down to its cellular structure. Flax that's grown in cool, damp climates like northern Europe produces incredibly long, smooth, strong fibers inside the actual stalk of the plant. The processing of flax is actually pretty brutal. It involves rotting the stalks in water, a process called retting, and then literally beating them to extract the fibers.
Sounds exhausting.
It was. But the resulting linen thread is extraordinary. When it's spun tightly, it is incredibly strong, very crisp, and it holds tension perfectly.
Which you need if you're making tiny bridges.
Exactly. Most importantly, it does not stretch out of shape. When your fabric is 80% air, you cannot have a thread that sags or warps. Linen gave them the structural integrity required for those early, highly geometric designs.
And then you have the animal-based fibers, specifically silk, which behaves entirely differently than a plant stalk.
Completely differently. Silk is just a marvel of biology. A silkworm produces a continuous filament to spin its cocoon.
Right.
Unlike flax or cotton, which are made of thousands of really short fibers spun together, which creates these microscopic, fuzzy edges. Silk is one long, unbroken strand.
It's incredibly smooth.
Unbelievably smooth. Luminous, too. And it can be spun into threads of just mind-boggling delicacy. It allowed lace makers to create pieces that looked like actual mist.
But there's a trade-off, right?
Definitely. It comes with a massive structural trade-off.
Yeah.
It is highly sensitive to friction, to light, and to moisture. It's much more fragile than linen.
So linen gives you the structural crispness, and silk gives you the ethereal delicacy.
Exactly.
And of course, if we jump forward to the clothing we wear today, we have modern synthetics, polyester, nylon, elastane.
Which fundamentally altered the physics of lace. Synthetic fibers are derived from petrochemicals. They are engineered for absolute uniformity and, crucially, for stretch.
Right, because old lace didn't stretch at all.
Not even a little. Adding elastane and mint lace could suddenly conform tightly to the moving human body without tearing the delicate architecture.
But as the research emphasizes, this shift completely changed the environmental reality of the fabric, which we will definitely explore later.
Yes, the microplastics issue is huge.
But before we get to modern machines and synthetic threads, we have to stay in the past for a minute, because creating this unbelievable architecture of tension-building suspension bridges out of microscopic silk and linen without any modern machinery, it required an almost incomprehensible human ingredient. Unbelievable, staggering amounts of time.
Because handmade lace is essentially crystallized time. When we trace the origins of true open-work lace, the historical records point us to the late 15th and early 16th centuries in Europe.
Right.
And interestingly, it didn't just slowly evolve in one isolated village. It burst onto the scene almost simultaneously in two highly connected, incredibly wealthy centers of global trade and art, Italy and Flanders, which is modern-day Belgium.
And the research points out that they each specialized in one of those two structural paths we just talked about, right?
Yes. Italy, specifically cities like Venice and Milan, became the absolute masters of needle lace. They really leaned into that dense, sculptural, highly artistic form.
While Flanders cities like Bruges and Antwerp, which were surrounded by the perfect damp climate for growing premium flax, they became world-renowned for the delicate, airy, intricate bobbin lace.
Exactly. And to really understand the value of this fabric, you have to picture the physical environment required to make it happen. You cannot make intricate needle or bobbin lace while walking around the village.
Right.
Or tending to a farm, or cooking a meal. It is not like knitting, which you can almost do by muscle memory while looking away or having a conversation.
Lace demands total focus.
A highly sedentary environment, absolute stillness and flawless lighting.
Right, because you are working with threads so fine they're barely visible to the naked eye. If the lighting is bad, you literally cannot see the architecture you're trying to build.
Which is why the records highlight that this work really found its home in two specific types of spaces. First, rural cottage industries. Women would sit immobile by the largest, brightest windows in their homes from sunrise to sunset.
And the detail about the glass globes, that blew my mind.
Oh, the water globes, yes. They would sometimes use these water-filled glass globes to magnify the candlelight during the dark winter months, just so they could keep working.
Which severely damaged their vision over time,
Both
obviously.
we ruined it.
Right.
And the second space was monastic life. Convents. Nuns were massive producers of early lace.
Because it fits the lifestyle perfectly.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Convents provided the perfect incubator for this craft. They were quiet, highly structured, free from the daily interruptions of child-rearing or agrarian labor.
Right. You have the time and the silence.
And the creation of lace was actually viewed by the church as a form of spiritual discipline. The intense focus, the patience, the creation of beauty out of nothing, it was framed as an act of devotion.
But the sheer labor intensity, I mean, I read the estimates in the documentation and I had to read them twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding.
It's hard to fathom today.
A highly skilled maker might spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day hunched over a pillow or a piece of parchment just to complete a section of lace the size of a postage stamp.
It is a profound investment of human life.
Yeah.
Elaborate pieces, like a large aristocratic collar or an altar cloth for a cathedral, a royal bridal veil. They required weeks, months, or even years of constant eye-straining, back-breaking labor.
And years for one garment.
Because of this, the production was often highly compartmentalized. The work was distributed across entire networks of villages just to finish a single large piece.
Like an assembly line, but spread out.
Exactly. One cottage would specialize only in making the delicate mesh background. Another household would spend months making just the little floral motifs. And then a master assembler in the city would take all these tiny separate pieces and meticulously stitch them together into the final design.
Which brings up a really driving question for me, a fundamental logical question.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's look at this objectively, almost like an alien observing humanity. We have human beings spending thousands upon thousands of hours, permanently ruining their eyesight, hunching over until their spines ache, all to create a fabric that provides absolutely zero warmth, zero protection from the rain, and zero practical survival utility. Why?
That's a great question.
If it doesn't keep you warm, and it takes 3 years to make one collar, why did humanity become so utterly obsessed with investing so much time and physical suffering into it?
It is the ultimate question of value, and it touches on the absolute core of human sociology.
Yeah,
Lace was not invented out of a need for physical survival.
clearly.
It emerged precisely because European societies had reached a level of economic and social complexity where time could be spent on non-essential beauty.
It was a flex.
It was a massive flex. It was a marker that society had transcended mere survival. Technical skill, pushed to the absolute extreme of human capability, became a tangible form of cultural capital.
And that completely explains the shift we see in the 16th to 18th centuries. Lace became the ultimate visual flex of wealth and power, specifically because it was so absurdly difficult and impractical to make.
It functioned as a brilliant, highly visible, soft power commodity. When you look at historical portraits from the 1600s or 1700s, the grand oil paintings in museums, who is wearing the most lace?
The men, which is wild to think about today, given how we view lace now.
Completely inverted.
But you look at those paintings of kings, aristocrats, high-ranking clergy, and they are practically drowning in it.
Yes. Men dominated the consumption of lace in its early centuries. They wore massive lace collars, those giant intricate ruffs that look like stiff, woven platters encircling their necks.
The ones where it looks like their head is sitting on a fancy plate.
Exactly those. They wore cascading lace cravats down their chests and deep lace cuffs falling over their knuckles, and the visual message they were broadcasting was incredibly deliberate and deeply political.
What were they trying to say? Just look how pretty I am.
No, not at all. They were saying, look how exempt I am from physical reality.
Oh, wow.
By wearing something so staggeringly expensive, so delicate, and completely impractical, you were visually proving to the entire world that you did not have to work with your hands.
Because you couldn't.
Right. You couldn't swing an axe or ride a horse into combat or even eat a meal easily while wearing a massive lace ruff. You were proving that you existed so far above the realm of physical labor that you could drape your body in a fabric that would be destroyed by a single hour of manual work.
It's the ultimate status symbol. It is the 17th century equivalent of driving a multi-million-dollar sports car that gets 3 miles to the gallon. but even more blatant because you wear it directly on your body.
Exactly.
And the historical records detail how this visual flexing got so out of hand that governments actually had to step in with legal restrictions, the sumptuary laws.
The sumptuary laws are a fascinating study in social anxiety.
Because lace was causing a panic, right?
A huge panic. Because lace was so powerful as a status symbol, it created a massive problem for the established aristocracy. The global economy was shifting at this time. Trade was expanding.
So new people are getting rich.
Yes. You suddenly had a rising middle class, spice merchants, bankers, guild masters who were accumulating massive amounts of liquid wealth. And what did they do with that wealth? They started buying lace to look like the aristocrats.
And the old money elites absolutely could not handle it.
They could not abide the blurring of class boundaries. The entire feudal and aristocratic system relied on instantly recognizable hierarchies. So governments across Europe passed sumptuary laws.
Which were basically fashion police laws.
Very strict, heavily enforced legal codes that restricted who was legally allowed to wear lace, how wide the lace could be, what specific patterns they could wear, and how much they could spend on it.
That is wild. It was literally a criminal offense to dress above your assigned social station. The police could actually arrest you for wearing a collar that was 2 inches too wide because you were only a merchant, not a duke.
Precisely. Because controlling lace meant controlling social visibility. In a highly structured society, you had to be able to read the power dynamics of a room in an instant just by looking at the specific geometric patterns on the collars and cuffs. If anyone could wear it, the entire visual language of power collapsed.
The economics of this obsession get even more intense when you look at state protectionism. The research heavily highlights the actions of Jean-Baptiste Colbert.
Yes, Colbert.
He was the brilliant, ruthless finance minister for King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. And Colbert realized that lace wasn't just fashion, it was macroeconomic warfare.
He was incredibly shrewd. Colbert subscribed to the economic theory of mercantilism, which basically argues that the amount of wealth in the world is finite.
Like a pie.
Right. Therefore, if the French aristocracy is spending massive amounts of gold buying lace from Italy and Flanders, France is literally bleeding its national wealth across its borders. Colbert recognized that lace was causing a massive trade deficit.
So what did he do? He essentially decided we are stealing this industry.
He literally did.
He legally banned the importation of foreign lace into France. And then he actively poached master lace makers from Venice.
Smuggling them out in secret.
Which was incredibly dangerous, right? Because the Venetian Republic was threatening the lives of anyone who shared their trade secrets.
Oh, they threatened assassination. The Venetians did not want to lose their monopoly.
But Colbert smuggled them out anyway, brought them to France, set up state-sponsored, heavily subsidized lace factories in towns like Alençon, and mandated that the French court only wear French-made lace. He turned lace into an issue of national security and economic dominance.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, though, we really have to pause and look at the deeply uncomfortable paradox sitting right at the center of this entire economy.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The sources detail this quite impartially. Lace functioned as a wearable architecture of inequality. The fabric of ultimate elite refinement, this symbol of absolute masculine aristocratic power and national wealth, was produced almost entirely through the exhausting, undervalued, and physically punishing labor of poor women, young girls, and nuns.
It's a massive, glaring contradiction. The people wearing it had all the power, and the people making it had absolutely none.
It's the defining contradiction of the textile. The makers, despite possessing world-class technical engineering skills, were paid absolute pennies. The entire global lace system relied on severe structural wage suppression.
How does that actually work in practice? Like, why couldn't a master lace maker just walk up to a noble, sell her work directly, and get rich?
Because the workers were entirely decentralized, and they lacked access to the capital, meaning the highly expensive raw linen and silk threads.
They couldn't afford the raw materials to start with.
Exactly. So an intermediary system developed. Wealthy merchants, called factors or lacemen, would buy the raw thread, travel out to the rural cottages, distribute the thread to the women, and give them specific patterns.
So they controlled the supply chain.
Completely. Months later, the merchant would return, collect the finished lace, pay the women a meager piece rate wage, and then turn around and sell the finished piece to the royal courts at an astronomical markup.
So the middlemen captured almost all the economic value.
Almost all of it. Furthermore, young girls were often preferred in the cottage industries because their small hands could maneuver the bobbins faster, their eyesight was fresh, and most importantly, Their labor could be valued even lower than an adult woman's.
Which is just deeply exploitative. So the incredible ethereal beauty of the lace completely masked the suffering and the physical toll required to make it. The elites are walking around the palaces of Versailles looking like glowing angels draped in woven mist, and the people who actually wove the mist are going blind and starving in a one-room cottage.
It was an economic machine that converted female labor directly into male-controlled capital and elite social status.
It made economic hierarchy instantly, tangibly legible.
Yes.
And because lace was so astronomically valuable, and because it required such an immense bottleneck of slow human labor, it naturally became the absolute perfect target for the ultimate historical disruptor.
The Industrial Revolution.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's think about this logically. If you have a luxury product that every rich person on the continent desperately wants, but it literally takes 3 years for a human being to make one of them, the first person who figures out how to build a machine to make it in 3 hours is going to rule the world.
The financial incentive to mechanize lace was unparalleled. And so the 19th century brought massive technological leaps that fundamentally shattered the centuries-old lace economy.
People were trying to build machines to do this.
Oh, absolutely. We start seeing brilliant engineers attempting to build massive machines of iron and steel that could somehow replicate the microscopic, intricate movements of human hands.
Which sounds impossible.
It was incredibly difficult. But the first major breakthrough was John Heathcote, who invented the bobbinet machine in 1809.
And Heathcote's machine was an engineering marvel, but it didn't make the complex floral patterns yet, right? It just mechanized the air part of the lace?
Correct. Heathcote figured out how to mechanize the creation of the net, or the mesh background.
Okay, how did it work?
His machine used a complex system of brass bobbins, swinging like pendulums through vertical warp threads. They would twist around the warps to produce a sheer, perfectly stable, hexagonal honeycomb net.
Like a massive mechanical loom just churning out the background.
Exactly. It could produce yards of this net in a fraction of the time it took a human. This meant artisans no longer had to spend months making the background mesh. They could buy the machine-made net and simply embroider the floral patterns onto it by hand.
But human ingenuity doesn't stop halfway. They wanted the machine to do the whole thing.
They did. Which brings us to John Levers.
The Levers machine. This is where the engineering gets highly sophisticated.
It really does. John Levers adapted his lace machine to actually work with the Jacquard loom system.
Now, I need you to break down the Jacquard system for me, because the research notes that this is essentially the earliest form of computer programming, decades before the actual computer was invented.
It is a beautiful piece of logic.
How does a loom act like a computer?
So the Jacquard system uses a series of stiff, heavy pasteboard cards. And these cards are punched with holes.
Like a punch card.
Literally a punch card. Each card corresponds to one single horizontal row of the design. The cards are laced together in a continuous chain.
Okay, I'm picturing a loop of cards feeding into a machine.
Exactly. Inside the machine, there are hundreds of metal hooks or needles resting against the card. When the machine presses against a card, if there's a hole in the card, the needle passes through the hole and triggers a mechanism that lifts a specific thread.
And if there isn't a hole?
If there is no hole, the needle is blocked by the solid card, and the thread stays down.
So it's binary. Hole or no hole. 1 or 0. Lift or drop.
Exactly that. A binary code translating a physical design. By changing the sequence of the punched cards, the machine could automatically lift and drop the exact right threads at the exact right time.
To weave complex lace.
Yes, to weave complex, intricate, highly detailed lace patterns directly into the fabric, completely without human hands guiding the design.
That is just brilliant. The machine reads the code and out comes a rose pattern.
It was revolutionary.
And then the documentation mentions another industrial method that sounds completely crazy on paper: chemical lace.
Chemical lace. This is a fascinating workaround. Engineers realized it was sometimes easier to just use standard high-speed embroidery machines than to try and build complex lace weaving machines.
So how do you get lace from embroidery?
Well, they would take a standard base fabric, say a sheet of fine silk, and they would use heavy cotton thread to heavily embroider a dense lace pattern all over that silk sheet.
Okay, but then you just have a silk sheet with heavy embroidery on it. That's not open work. That's just a decorated sheet.
Right. But here's the trick. Silk and cotton react differently to certain chemicals.
Oh.
Once the embroidery was finished, they would plunge the entire roll of fabric into a specific chemical bath. often a weak alkaline solution, or a specific acid, depending on the exact fibers used.
What did the bath do?
The chemical would completely dissolve the silk-based fabric, essentially eating it away into nothing. But it would leave the heavy cotton embroidery completely untouched.
Oh my gosh.
They washed it, and what was left behind was the intricate structural skeleton. The base vanished, leaving only the lace.
That is incredible. It's like a conceptual echo of the old needle lace method where they cut away the parchment, but completely industrialized through chemistry.
A very dangerous industrial chemistry, yes.
But this rapid technological shift wasn't just a win for engineering, right? It caused an enormous, painful social earthquake.
Oh, it completely destroyed the traditional cottage economy. Production violently shifted away from decentralized rural homes.
Because you can't have a massive steam-powered jacquard loom in your living room.
Exactly.
Okay.
In the cottage system, despite the terrible pay, women at least had some autonomy over their time, their physical space, and the rhythm of their work. Industrialization forced the production directly into massive, centralized, deafeningly loud, smoke-filled factories in cities like Nottingham.
The lace makers went from being skilled artisans, even if they were exploited, to becoming wage laborers. They were now just operators, tied to the relentless, unforgiving rhythm of an iron machine.
And as we move further into the modern era, the environmental footprint of lace shifted drastically as well.
Right, going back to what we touched on earlier.
The research points out that this industrialization eventually led to a total shift in materials. By the mid-20th century, the demand for cheap, stretchable lace led the industry to embrace synthetic fibers, polyester, nylon, and elastane.
Which are entirely derived from fossil fuels.
Yes.
Which brings up a very modern, pressing issue highlighted in the documents. The European Environment Agency points out that the washing and wearing of synthetic textiles, including the massive volume of synthetic lace used in modern fast fashion lingerie and clothing, is a recognized and significant source of microplastic pollution.
The physics of the fabric actually work against the environment here.
Oh, so?
Because lace is an open-work structure, those tiny synthetic threads are highly exposed to friction in a washing machine. There's no solid surface to protect them, so they break down and shed microscopic plastic fibers.
And those fibers bypass water filtration systems?
They go right into the oceans, into the water table, and eventually right into the food chain. We've transitioned from organic flax, which would harmlessly decay back into the earth, to synthetic polymer threads that will essentially outlive humanity.
That is a stark reality. It really is. But looking at the cultural shift caused by mechanization, here's where my mind gets really tripped up.
Okay.
I want you to think about the paradox of progress here. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an aristocrat in, say, the 1850s. Suddenly, a machine in Nottingham can spit out a length of lace in 3 hours that looks almost identical to the handmade lace that used to take a village of women 6 months to painstakingly create.
Right.
If the machine-made lace looks practically the same to the naked eye, what were those aristocrats actually buying before the machines came along?
That's the million-dollar question.
Were they buying the physical beauty of the floral pattern? Or were they secretly buying the suffering, the time, and the extreme exclusivity that the lace represented?
That is the core philosophical dilemma of industrialization right there. The mechanization of lace fundamentally changed the moral economy of the textile.
The moral economy.
Yes. Industrialization democratized the appearance of lace. Suddenly, the middle class and even the working class could afford to buy machine-made lace to trim their Sunday dresses or their parlor curtains.
But in doing so, it completely destabilized the prestige of the labor.
Completely. Because if the grocer's wife can have lace on her curtains, it is utterly useless as a status symbol for a duke.
Right. The cultural meaning of the fabric shifted almost overnight.
It did. For centuries, the visual language of lace translated directly to, "This took an astronomical amount of human time, therefore I am wealthy and powerful."
And once the machines arrived,
The translation became, "This looks like something that took a long time." The authenticity of the human sacrifice was removed, leaving only the hollow simulation of luxury.
this looks like something that took a long time. That is such a profound way to look at modern luxury. So if the global elites can no longer use lace to visually prove they are richer and more powerful than everyone else, what happens to the fabric? They don't just ban it or throw it in the trash.
No, the material is still beautiful.
Well, instead, society had to find completely new ways to use lace to signal meaning. And this is where lace transitions, and it becomes the fabric of life's most intense emotional thresholds.
Yes, it transitioned from a marker of hard political and economic power into a marker of liminality.
Liminality, so transitional states.
Exactly. Liminal states in sociology are the in-between moments of human life, the rites of passage, the transitions from one state of being to another. Because lace is physically porous, because it is quite literally a threshold between the physical body and the outside world, it is symbolically perfectly suited for these intense moments of transition.
That makes so much sense. Think about when you actually see lace being worn heavily today. You see it at baptisms, the traditional white lace christening gown.
Right. It symbolizes purity, innocence, a fragile new beginning. The child is physically crossing the threshold into the community and into the faith.
And of course, the most prominent example, marriage,
A bridal gown.
the white lace bridal gown, and most importantly, the veil. The lace veil is the ultimate threshold garment. When a bride wears a veil over her face, it acts as a physical and visual filter. She is separated from the world in a liminal state, transitioning from her individual identity into a bound social marital role.
And once the vows are spoken and the veil is lifted, the threshold is officially crossed.
It's a very powerful ritual object, and on the exact opposite end of the emotional spectrum, you have mourning.
Black lace.
Black lace veils and heavily trimmed mourning dresses. They've been used for centuries, particularly popularized by Queen Victoria, to filter the experience of deep grief.
The widow is physically separated from the vibrant, moving, living world around her. She is enveloped in shadows, but because it is lace, she can still look out.
It's a poignant way of visually communicating to society, I am physically here, but emotionally, I am not fully participating in the world right now.
It perfectly highlights the visual paradox of lace that makes it so psychologically and emotionally potent. It covers while revealing. It softens the outline of the human body while simultaneously drawing the viewer's eye directly to the skin beneath the open spaces.
It allows for vulnerability, but it is a highly controlled, curated vulnerability.
Exactly, which perfectly explains how lace went from being the absolute uniform of kings and male aristocrats to being so heavily feminized.
Right. By the time we get through the 19th and into the 20th centuries, men had essentially abandoned lace entirely.
The historical documents refer to this as the Great Male Renunciation.
Where men's fashion shifted toward dark, practical, sober wool suits, and lace became almost exclusively linked to women's bodies in the domestic sphere. Lingerie, bridal wear, domestic crafts, heirloom tablecloths draped over sideboards.
That gender shift is deeply revealing about how society assigns value.
Oh, absolutely.
When lace was associated with masculine aristocratic power and state-sponsored wealth, it was viewed as serious. It was a testament to grand artistry, engineering, and national dominance.
Well, once it became associated with the female domestic sphere, intimate apparel, and female bodies,
Its cultural weight was immediately downgraded.
and this is where I really need to highlight a specific point from our source documents because it completely changed my perspective. The author makes a compelling argument. Calling lace pretty without acknowledging the intense engineering behind it is like looking at a massive cathedral and just calling it nice stonework.
That's a fantastic quote.
I want you, the listener, to really mull over that comparison. We have this terrible, ingrained habit of looking at heavily feminized labor textile arts, knitting, lace-making, weaving, and immediately dismissing it as frivolous or just cute domestic crafts.
We really do.
But a piece of handmade lace contains incredibly complex mathematical geometry. It requires advanced spatial reasoning to map a 3D pattern, structural engineering to distribute tension so the fabric doesn't collapse, and intense manual knowledge passed down through generations.
It is engineering.
It is. But we casually dismiss it simply because women did it sitting at a kitchen table by a window instead of men doing it standing over a drafting board in a university.
It is a profound systemic historical bias. We fundamentally diminish the intellect required to create textiles.
Yeah. And because lace became so heavily burdened with these specific, rigid associations in the 20th century, purity, weddings, traditional domestic femininity, delicate restraint, it naturally set the stage for its next inevitable evolution.
Rebellion.
Exactly. Because what do you do with a symbol of traditional, fragile purity when you want to cause a massive cultural scene?
You weaponize it.
Yeah.
You turn it into the ultimate visual tool for pop culture rebellion.
Precisely. Or rather, it is a very natural psychological reaction. If society dictates that lace means good, quiet, pure, obedient girl, then taking that exact fabric and wearing it while being loud, sexual, dominant, and aggressive, it becomes a deeply disruptive, subversive act.
Let's talk about the 1980s. Madonna.
Oh, the perfect example.
She explodes onto the global scene wearing sheer white lace tops, black lace fingerless gloves, layering them with heavy crucifixes and messy hair. She's actively taking this deeply traditional, almost sacred feminine fabric, the symbol of the convent and the pristine bridal altar, and dragging it directly into the sweat and heat of the nightclub.
She mixed it with raw, unapologetic sexuality. It was shocking specifically because of the fabric she chose.
And she wasn't the only artist utilizing the deep contradictions embedded in the threads. Look at Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac.
Right, she used flowing, layered antique lace to create a persona that was entirely different from Madonna's.
Nicks used it to appear mystical, ethereal, almost witchcraft adjacent. It wasn't about traditional purity at all. It was about projecting an untouchable, ancient, bohemian power.
And moving into modern music, you have artists like Lana Del Rey, who uses heavy, vintage lace aesthetics in her visuals to evoke this intense nostalgia, kind of melancholy, tragic, fragile femininity.
But at the exact same time, in the exact same decade, you have Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, walking down the aisle in a meticulously crafted, long-sleeved lace wedding dress that was broadcast to billions of people.
And her use of lace was designed to reassure the entire world that tradition, royalty, modesty, and institutional stability were still completely intact. Lace can literally do both jobs simultaneously. It is incredible.
And we cannot ignore how countercultures and subcultures interact with it. In the late 20th century, the goth and punk movements completely violently subverted lace.
They took black lace, distressed it, tore jagged holes in it, ripped the edges, and paired it with heavy distressed denim, spiked metal hardware, and heavy leather boots.
Tearing lace is such a visceral, aggressive act.
It is, because once you understand how much time, care, and mathematical precision went into building that structure, destroying it is a massive statement.
Yeah.
It's an act of rejection of softness as weakness. It's rejecting the expectation of perfection.
It takes a fabric meant to be pristine, meant to be preserved in tissue paper for generations, and says, we find power and beauty in the decay, in the damage, and in the dark.
And the subversion is continuing right now into contemporary fashion.
We are currently seeing a massive resurgence of lace in modern menswear. High fashion runways are routinely putting men in sheer lace shirts, lace trousers, and tailored lace jackets.
It's a full circle moment.
It is a direct challenge to those rigid 19th century gender norms that stripped lace away from men during the Great Male Renunciation in the first place. It is intentionally blurring the boundaries of traditional masculinity.
And the physical technology of how we make open work is still evolving right alongside the culture. The research discusses 3D printed lace and laser-cut openwork polymers.
We are taking the fundamental logic of lace, the idea of building immense strength out of strategically placed empty space, and applying it to futuristic materials, fashion tech, and even architecture.
Which raises an important question, perhaps the most important question of the cultural section. Why does lace survive every single fashion era? How can a specific textile structure invented in the 1500s still be culturally relevant and emotionally provocative in 2026?
It survives because it adapts. It is inherently multivalent.
Meaning it holds multiple meanings.
Exactly. It holds massive contradictions within its open spaces: innocence and raw sensuality, rigid tradition and punk rebellion, extreme fragility and structural strength. Because it doesn't have one single fixed meaning, it allows every new generation to remix it, to project their own current desires and anxieties onto it without ever losing that underlying emotional charge.
It's a complete cultural chameleon, but as we move away from pop culture and dive into the deep psychology of our source material, we get to what is honestly my absolute favorite part of this entire deep dive.
The subpersonality lens.
Yes. The author of the research applies a very specific psychological lens to the structure of lace to see what this fabric can teach us about human personality and how social systems operate.
The source introduces a depthly fascinating framework, specifically focusing on a psychological archetype they name the Kelly personality.
I love the Kelly archetype so much. The author describes Kelly as the emotional atmosphere architect, of a group.
The quiet anchor. Huh.
Exactly. If you think about your friends or your workplace, the Kelly personality is the kind of person who is often visually invisible, or at least they stay out of the spotlight, but they are absolutely essential to the survival of the group.
They act as the root system.
Right. They hold the emotional space in a room. They quietly mediate conflicts before they blow up. They nurture the people who are struggling, and they provide this incredible, reliable, quiet strength. They never demand the microphone, but if they leave the room or if they quit the job, the entire dynamic of the group immediately collapses.
And the structural parallel the author draws here is brilliant. Lace works exactly like the Kelly personality type within the ecosystem of a garment. When you look at an elaborate historical dress, the lace rarely carries the heady structural weight of the clothing. The heavy silk brocade, the dense cotton, or the stiff whalebone corsetry is doing all the heavy lifting to hold the garment up.
But the lace completely changes the vibe.
Yes. Trimming the neckline, softening the cuffs, it completely changes the emotional tone of everything around it. It filters the harsh light. It softens the hard edges of the heavy fabric. It provides breathability.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this Kelly archetype, this emotional architect,
Yeah.
and we pair that with the history we just discussed, the centuries of poor women losing their eyesight in freezing cottages to weave air, the nuns laboring in silence, the quiet strength of the threshold, what is the ultimate philosophical takeaway of this entire body of research?
The core philosophical lesson that Lace teaches us is that human systems have a profound, almost inevitable tendency to obscure the labor they depend on the most. The things in our world that look the lightest, the softest, and the most effortless are almost always held together by the most intense, invisible forms of effort, tension, and sacrifice.
That is so true.
Lace forces us to realize that absence is not emptiness. It is a highly engineered space. Softness is not weakness. It is a remarkably resilient form of connection. And the people who provide the care, the patience, and the emotional filtration in our societies are the true structural engineers of our communities, even if they never get the credit or the spotlight they deserve.
That is an incredible way to look at the world. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We have traveled an immense distance.
We really have.
We started with a single needle making microscopic, invisible knots in 16th century Italy. We navigated the grandiose posturing courts of French kings playing economic warfare. We moved through the clattering, smoke-filled, deafening factories of the Industrial Revolution, explored the emotional weight of bridal veils and mourning clothes, and went right up to Madonna dancing in nightclubs and the gender-fluid runways of modern high fashion.
It's been quite a ride. Lace is truly the ultimate testament to how human beings can take absolute patience, combine it with brilliant mathematics, and turn absence into breathtaking design.
It is a permanent physical record of our human aspirations, our rigid social hierarchies, our capacity for engineering, and our deep, unending need for beauty.
Very well said.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. I want you to look around your own life, your workplace, your friend group, or your family dynamic. Ask yourself, who are the lace makers in your world? What are the invisible systems, the quiet, consistently undervalued labor, or the empty spaces that are secretly holding your entire cathedral together?
Because if you don't recognize them, and those invisible threads snap, the entire structure falls.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective on the architecture of the everyday world around you. Until next time, stay curious.